Hi everybody, my name is Emily Rondell and I am with the Community Learning Team at the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. So today I thought I would come to you and talk to you about a group of living things that are all around us all the time. They're vitally important in the natural world and to us as people every single day. And sometimes we kind of overlook them. I'm going to give you guys a hint as to what sort of living thing I'm talking about. I'm just going to show this to you. Anyone know what this is? Did you guess a fungus? In this case, a mushroom? Because if so, you are right. Fungi are really incredible creatures. It is thought that there are close to 1 million different types of fungi in the world. Although I will say that the majority of those are microscopic. We can't see them, we can't interact with them, and it's a little bit difficult to enjoy them for that reason. But there are still thousands and thousands of different types of fungi, often taking the form of mushrooms, that are around us in nature all of the time. And they do unbelievably important things in our ecosystems. They break down organic material, things like dead trees or plants, and recycle them, start the process to kind of return the nutrients that made up that living thing back into the world. And we're learning more and more about the really crucial role that they play in terms of communing with the roots of plants deep underground in order to share nutrients and really help forests, plants, trees grow a little bit better. So I took a walk in the woodland behind me just to see what sorts of fungi I could find and maybe share with you guys. And it had rained recently, so I knew that I might be able to find quite a few varieties. And I actually did find a lot of stuff to share with you. And luckily, I was able to find groups of mushrooms specifically from a few different families or groups of mushroom that you might be able to look out for yourself too. The first group, or examples of the first group that I found, were the polypores, which are mushrooms whereby the fungus that makes these mushrooms lives in decaying matter, often decaying logs or wood underground. And so you'll often see these big polypores, often they're called bracket fungi as well, growing on the sides of dead or dying trees or growing on fallen logs. And here are a few of the ones that I was able to find. They're both pretty common around here. This one I quite like. This is, your typical bracket fungus. The fungus, again, like I said, that makes this kind of mushroom, or what we call a fruiting body, grows throughout the body of the dead wood that it's found on. And then when that organism is ready to reproduce, it kind of grows one of these little guys, which is called a fruiting body. And it's called a fruiting body for a very specific reason. It's a little bit like a fruit. It's part of kind of the reproductive strategy. Just like on a raspberry bush, the fruit itself is not the entire organism. It's just part of the reproductive strategy that holds the seeds. Same is true here with this little organism. So the bracket fungus itself, part of a larger organism, but it has this really interesting structure underneath. And I don't know if you guys can see it too clearly, but the whole underside of a polypore like this is made up of teeny tiny little holes, which are called pores. Next time you see a fungus like this, just go up and see if you can see the underside. They're really small. And outside of each of these pores comes spores, because that's how fungi reproduce. They put out spores. Normally they have to wait for kind of wet conditions, which is why after it rains, you often see a lot of mushrooms kind of sprouting up or becoming more easier to see. And then these spores kind of colonize new locations in the world. This particular polypore is called artist's conch. And that's because, as you can see, I've already scratched up the bottom a little bit. The bottom is really easy to draw on, and it's a beautiful white surface that artists kind of use to draw on, or that you could kind of make a little sketch on. And I think that's kind of cool. So that's a polypore. I found a couple of different types of polypore in my walk just in the woods behind me. I found this one. This is a really common one that you'll see. This one is often called tinder polypore. It was used to kind of start fires throughout history. Apparently it catches fire pretty easily. I've never tried that. And I also was lucky enough to find this super cool bracket fungus. It's super shiny, orange, really beautiful. And this is a Ganoderma. That's the group of organisms that it belongs to. And often these are called reishi mushrooms as well. So super cool. Another polypore, and you can see the pores underneath. Or if you can't see the pores, you can at least see what looks like kind of a solid mass, but there are really, really tiny holes in there. These aren't what most of us think of typical mushrooms as looking like, though, these polypores that I found. There's a whole other group of mushrooms that are a little bit more typical, and these are the guild mushrooms, and I found a great example of a guild mushroom right here. Now, if I turn this around, you can see that underneath this mushroom, there are these beautiful, really delicate looking gills. And in the case of a mushroom like this, the spores are going to come from these gills. Super cool. You can also see, it may be kind of obvious, that this is not the sort of fungus that grows kind of on dead wood, on logs or dead or dying trees. This is the sort of fungus that kind of grows directly from the ground. The organism that makes this mushroom, this fungus that lives kind of in the soil and underground, puts up this fruiting body kind of straight from the earth. And this particular type of guild fungus also is responsible for forming mycorrhizal relationships with trees and other plants as well. So you can see coming off from the bottom of this mushroom are all of these tiny little, they look like roots, but because this is a mushroom, it doesn't actually have roots, it has mycorrhiza. And these sorts of little root-like structures will form associations with the roots of plants and do really crucial nutrient exchanges with those plants. Really awesome kind of thing. I'm actually going to put this back into the ground. I should say I kind of collected some of these mushrooms. Normally that is okay to do if you just want to kind of see one a little bit more closely. Like I said, this is the fruiting body of a larger organism. So just like kind of an apple is to an apple tree or a raspberry is to a raspberry bush, it's not like picking a plant and kind of killing the entire organism, although you should definitely minimize it wherever possible. And also we want these things, this is the reproductive part of this organism. So if we want more mushrooms in our woodland, which I definitely do, we want to make sure that the spores that are in this little cap right here are able to kind of, be dispersed into the woodland. So we want to keep them where they are. So I'm going to put this one back when we're done. Anyway, fruiting body of a guild mushroom. Just one more shot at the gills right there. Kind of interesting. There's also some really kind of interesting mushrooms that are neither of these things. And this one's a little bit crumpled. He's a little bit worse for wear, but this is a really interesting mushroom I found that is called a bolete. Bolete mushrooms are actually known to be, some of their members are known to be some of the most delicious mushrooms that we have. They're often highly, highly edible. And this is a mushroom that looks like your, typical mushroom that grows from the ground. But if you look kind of on the underside of it, you'll see it doesn't have gills like the one that I just showed you. It also has pores. The last type of mushroom that I want to share with you guys is this really cool one that I found right here. This is called a lobster mushroom. And it's especially interesting because each lobster mushroom kind of started life out differently than the rest. And that's because lobster mushrooms can be a variety of different species of fungus, of mushroom that is parasitized by another fungus, turning them bright red and giving them this kind of irregular, wavy appearance. So lobster mushrooms are a fungus that's attacked by another fungus. Really, really interesting. They have this amazing bright color, and they still do look like they reproduce. So I've had this lobster mushroom around for a couple of hours, and I don't know if you guys can see this powdery white stuff on it. Those are the spores that are being released. So really, really interesting kind of layered fungi on this one very interesting looking mushroom. You can find them kind of bursting up from the ground at this particular time of year. Super cool lobster mushroom. I really highly recommend looking for mushrooms. It is really difficult to identify them, I will admit that. A lot of professional mycologists, those are mushroom scientists, can't even agree kind of where one species ends and another begins, which species should be grouped together. And often, I will say, it is actually pretty impossible to identify a mushroom species just by looking at it, or a fungal species just by looking at it. However, the really fun challenge is just appreciating the diversity around you. Like, look at these guys that I found on some decaying wood as well. Appreciating what they do, and also just seeing how far along in the identification journey you can get. Maybe you'll just say, that's a polypore, or that's a bolete, or that's a guild mushroom, and that's okay. Although sometimes you can get a little bit further just by consulting some reference materials. And I will say one great way to kind of start to identify mushrooms specifically is by looking at what we call the spore print. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how to make a spore print and show you some of the results of a spore print that I make. And it's a really simple procedure. All you'll need is a mushroom. So I have one here that I found on some decaying wood. Try and get one that looks a little bit fresh. And you'll also need a piece of white paper. And so what I'm going to do essentially is just put this mushroom down on the white paper. And I'm going to cover this up with a glass, just a regular drinking glass. And I'll leave this here for now. And then what will happen is, as the kind of gills, or the pores, depending on what kind of mushroom you collect, kind of fall off of the mushroom, they'll kind of collect on the paper. And in that way, you can see what color the spores are. And that's actually where identification of a lot of fungi starts. What color are the spores? And a lot of field guides to mushrooms will kind of frustratingly, if you're not looking for that kind of a commitment, start with, what's the spore color? Including really great mushroom guides like this one. All of the mushrooms in this guide are organized by spore color for the most part. So this is light spored mushrooms on this page over here, and then dark spored mushrooms later on. So by collecting a spore print, you can really start the identification journey a little bit. Okay, so I have my spore print ready to go. I'm going to show it to you. You can see here, I have a mushroom on some paper under a glass. And we're gonna come back to the spore print a little bit later on and see what color spores this mushroom has, and hopefully we'll figure out what it is based on that information, and also kind of the rest of what we know about it. So stay tuned. Okay, so I left the spore print to kind of set with the mushroom in the paper for around an hour. And I came back, and you can kind of see the beginnings of a spore print on the paper. And in this case, you can see that it's kind of a light brown color. Now, normally when people do a spore print, they leave it overnight or for a longer period of time, and you can get like a really, really full and very dark spore print. But in this case, we just have kind of the beginnings of one, and you can see that this is a brown spored or a dark spored mushroom. And what I did was I looked up the mushroom in my book, and I found that this is a particular type of mushroom called a flat crepe. And it grows on rotting wood, which makes a lot of sense because that's where I found it. It has a brown spore print, which we also know. And one other feature, which totally clinched it, is that the base, which you can kind of see here, is described as fuzzy. And it's really hard right there. You can see this has like a very fuzzy base, just like a really fuzzy short stalk. So yeah, this is a crepe mushroom, and yeah, kind of interesting. So the spore print helped me figure out what kind of mushroom I was looking at, and that's one of the techniques that you can use as well when you're trying to figure out kind of what mushroom or what mushroom family or maybe genus your specimen is from. So that's kind of cool. There's a whole variety of other ways that people, especially mycologists and scientists, figure out mushroom identity. Sometimes people look at the spores and their shape and structure under a microscope. That can be a little bit tricky for a hobbyist naturalist like ourselves to do. And, you know, most of the taxonomy of mushrooms that happens right now, which means just sorting out the mushroom and fungus family tree, happens through genetic research these days. So people kind of look at the genetics of different species and figure out how they're related to one another. So we kind of used the tools available to us. We looked at spore prints, we looked at structure, we looked at habitat, and all of those things kind of led us to an identification. A lot of the time you may just kind of get to a general group or a family group of mushrooms or fungi, and you may have to leave it there, but it's super fun to just kind of follow the trail of clues to figure out what kind of fungus you're looking at. So I'll leave it there for you guys. I hope next time, especially after a big rain event, you can get out and just start looking for different kinds of fungus around you and different kinds of mushroom around you. You can look for polypores, you can look for boletes, you can look for all sorts of different guild mushrooms as well. And I think you'll be surprised at how many there are once you start to look for them. So goodbye and good luck.